Hello and welcome to my channel. Do you ever wonder what the difference is between a one-way ANOVA and a two-way ANOVA? How about a three-way ANOVA or a t-test? Stick around and you'll find out today. So what is an ANOVA?
I don't know.
An ANOVA is the statistical test that you would use if you want to compare the means of more than two groups. So what if you only have two groups? Then you would use the t-test. For example, let's say that you have observations from Toyota and Honda cars where you collected the miles per gallons and you have that for many customers. Then you would want to use the t-test because even though the main category is car, within that main category you only have Toyota and Honda and you only want to compare those two. Now, if you had Toyota, Honda and Ford, now you have three categories under the variable called car and you have their miles per gallon, so one outcome variable. Then that will be a one-way ANOVA because you want to compare the means of more than two groups. So, and the fact that it's one way, it's because you still have one main category called car. So let's use a different example to explain a one-way ANOVA. Let's say you have a field of tomato plants and you divide this field into three blocks. One of them will have a control, which means that no fertilizer is applied. The other field would have some kind of fertilizer applied to it. Let's call it fertilizer X. And the third block would have a different fertilizer. Let's call it fertilizer Y. These levels or groups make up the main category, which is fertilizer type. And because we have one category, that's what makes it a one-way ANOVA. But what makes it an ANOVA is because we have three groups that we're comparing or more, right? So if you only had treatment fertilizer type, and let's say you had control and treatment one, then this would be a t-test. You would use a t-test for this. And also at the end, you're collecting outcome variable like the weight of the total fruits that you harvest. And then you want to compare the means of these three. So you can imagine now for the two-way ANOVA, instead of having one independent variable or one main category called fertilizer type, now let's say you have another category called irrigation type that also has its own levels that you want to compare. And then you also have your outcome variable, which is what you want to measure at the end of the experiment. In this case, it could be something like the weight of total fruits harvested. So you want to see if the treatment, the fertilizer type and the irrigation type affected your outcome variable. And then you want to see, for example, which combination of these would be the best to give you the most yield. And for a three-way ANOVA, then you can imagine another independent variable here that could be something like soil type, which would also have its own levels. Once you get to 3, 4, 5 categories, then you would just call it an ANOVA.
Simple, simple.
And quick refresher on what is the hypothesis. Well, the null hypothesis would say that there's no differences between the means of the groups. So this is the mu means mean. So the null hypothesis is like the default setting or the status quo, which says it doesn't matter if I apply for fertilizer, I'm still gonna get, it's not gonna make a difference in how many fruits I harvest at the end of the experiment. But then if the alternative would be, well, maybe some of these means are not statistically equal, and that's what you're testing when you in the ANOVA. So basically, if your p-value is less than 0.05 or some threshold that you already decided, then you reject the null hypothesis and conclude that the alternative, which is that not all means are equal. And then if your p-value is greater than 0.05, you fail to reject the null hypothesis, which is kind of like saying you accept the null hypothesis, even though I was trained as a statistician to not say you accept, but technically that's what you're doing. And then you just say that there's not enough evidence to suggest statistical differences between the means. Quick note about the hypothesis test. So if you have a p-value that's less than 0.05 and you conclude that not all means are equal, you won't be able to know which means are different. For that, you will need to use a post hoc test like the Tukey test, which I have the link to that tutorial on how to do that in R below in the description box. Thank you so much for watching my channel. If you like the content and you'd like to see more, please like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments what else you'd like to see.